Great game or what? Thank you for coming back. And this is our Seamhead edition. Our guest today is Mike Schur, the mind behind Parks and Rec, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. He was also a part of The American Office, which is my all-time favorite show.
And a lunatic baseball fan.
That is the big point here, is you might be thinking, Mike Schur, why is he on this baseball father-son podcast? He loves baseball and knows so many great stats and baseball stories. We're so excited for him to join us. That's coming up.
And we're also excited that today is your second anniversary of your wedding. You and Emily were married 2 years ago today. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Emily looked great that day.
Ain't that the truth? That was an amazing day. We got married. We were living in Las Vegas at the time, and the night before we did the rehearsal dinner, but 2 nights before the wedding we went to the Las Vegas Aviators baseball game, and let me just say, we had a blast. My wife threw out the first pitch, which we had to practice for, because I told her I wasn't going to let her come to a baseball family's wedding, and it was her wedding.
And then you sang the national anthem when we didn't even know this was going to happen.
Yeah.
So the groom sang the national anthem. It was a wonderful night, Jeff. It was really good. It wasn't as good, by the way, as Pudge Rodriguez's wedding day. Hall of Fame catcher Pudge Rodriguez, June 20th, 1991. He got married in the morning, and in the afternoon, he got called up to make his major league debut. And that night against the White Sox at Comiskey Park, batting ninth, he drove in 2 runs and threw out 2 base stealers. Now, that's a pretty good first look, wouldn't you say?
Now, I've only been a husband for 2 years, but I know the answer to that question is, what was the best part of your day? Was the morning, not the 2 knocks he got, the 2 ribbies he got.
Right.
So I mentioned it's the Seamhead edition. Dad, to you, what is a Seamhead? Or to someone who's listening who says, I'm a baseball fan, but I've never heard that, or I don't know what the official definition of a Seamhead is.
The broad definition is it's just anyone who loves baseball and is compelled by it and is captivated. As a baseball writer, Mark Wicker, one of our brilliant writers and still is from years ago, he came up with the qualifications as a writer be a Seamhead. You had to have covered a minor league game. You had to have covered an inter-squad game. You had to have covered a winter ball game, 3 for 3 for me, by the way. And you had to have interviewed some crusty coach, manager who spat tobacco on your shoes and said, no, I saw him at Bakersfield. Something like that has to happen in order for you to be qualified as a baseball writer as a true Seamhead, because we do these compulsive things as baseball writers and people all over the country. Like for me, this is embarrassing, but as you know, Jeff, I cut out every box score of every game for 20 years and taped them in books like this, 2 books a year. You remember this when I used to do this every day when you were a kid. Did you ever look at your dad who's sitting over in the corner like a sad little tired old man, and you watched him clip out stuff like he was 7 years old? Did you ever look at me and go, like, what are you doing over there?
It looked like you were doing arts and crafts in the corner. When a little kid's occupied, like they're good, they're in the corner. That was you with the little tape, the Scotch tape you would use. I remember it so vividly. And do you remember the fateful day when your entire closet collapsed?
Yes. First off, I cut out every box score for 20 years and never missed a day, meaning I never just skipped a day and then 2 in one day, which I think we can all acknowledge is a far greater streak than anything put together by Cal Ripken. And yes, after about 15 years of collecting all my notebooks, I didn't have any place to put them. So I put them on the top shelf in my clothes closet at home, and the weight of the box score books collapsed the shelf. Yep. I got home from a trip and all my clothes are lying on the ground like in a heap of plaster because the whole thing is falling apart. So my 38 short suits are all ruined. Believe me, it's not easy to find 38 short on the rack. And there they are, stuck with all my box score books on the floor, all my 3-hit games for Wade Boggs. Uncle Matt, the great Uncle Matt, he came over and rebuilt my closet so I could put my box box score books. Should have been a sign from God that maybe this is a time to end doing this ridiculous exercise every day. I counted it up, Jeff. The amount of time it took me to clip out the box scores, tape them in, cost me 35 days of my life.
I have such vivid memories of, we have an annual trip to the Outer Banks with families my dad grew up with, and I have such vivid memories of you driving for a long time, going to different gas stations, trying to find a newspaper that had all the box scores while you were on vacation.
Right, and that's the only reason I stopped cutting out the box scores, Jeff, is that the deadlines for the East Coast papers were so early that it took me I couldn't find all 15 box scores. I could only say find 9 or 10. Then I would have to search the next day in order to find, the ones from the day before. So I finally gave it up. Now I do my box scores online, which is just okay.
It's not the same. It's not the same art form. I get that.
Right, totally.
All right, let's take some takeaways on what's happened in the last week of baseball. We release an episode every single Tuesday at midnight, so thank you for following and subscribing. You can also catch us on YouTube. We do this all on video as well. What are some takeaways from the last week?
Well, Shohei Ohtani had another great week. Every week has been great. By the way, Jeff, he had more extra base hits before the month of May than any Dodger has ever had since the team moved to LA in 1958. Wow. And with all this stuff swirling around him, some of it, of course, is self-imposed. For him to keep that kind of focus is amazing to me. I'll never forget it. One of the Dodgers told me in spring training he'd never seen Shohei on a daily basis. He goes, everything he does, every movement he makes is surgical. There is a reason for everything that he does. Every swing he takes in the cage, every ball he throws, that's why he's got that focus. Another Japanese player, Shota Imanaga, is 4-0, 0.98 ERA right now for the Cubs. And Jeff, it's time to recognize again how good the Japanese players are. Right. Bobby Valentine, who used to manage in Japan, told me 15 years ago, everyday player in Japan could make a major league team right now. That was 15 years ago, and they're way better now than they were 15 years ago. So when people ask you, what is Japanese baseball? Is it AA? No, it's way higher than that, and a lot of those guys could make major league teams. And I thought you would like this. Ranger Suarez of the Phillies is off to a tremendous start, 5-0, 1.32 ERA. One of the best fielding pitchers, Jeff, I've ever seen.
He's unbelievable.
Maddox and Jim Cott are the two greatest, but this guy catches everything that comes near him. And Brad Miller, former major leaguer, still trying to get back in, told me last offseason, he said, the guy I want you to watch for 2024, the guy that's going to take another step forward and become a real star in the game is Ranger Suarez. And he's absolutely right so far. And you just got a dog, right?
Yeah, we just welcomed a puppy into our life because we thought an 8-month-old baby just wasn't a challenge enough. So we got a puppy, and we named our puppy Ranger.
That's great.
It's perfect. And so Ranger Suarez is my wife's favorite player.
Right.
He loves his baby face. He looks like he's clean shaven every game. I just don't think he grows a beard.
Right. So, and you said, well, Dad, you used to cover the Rangers. That had a little something to do with your previous dog, the great dog Pirate. So now you've had a Pirate and a Ranger. So are you going to maybe you're going to name all your dogs after major league teams?
Well, I think there'll be good ones, like Rocky is a good dog name. That's good.
You can't name an Angel because we already had an Angel.
Right,
and you can't name it Astro either because Astro is the name of George Jetson's dog in The Jetsons, a cartoon from the 60s, which I grew up watching. And former major league pitcher David Price had a dog, and he named him Astro. And I said, why did you name him Astro? He said, well, I love the Jetsons. I said, you're way too young to have seen the Jetsons. So I love the way what people name their dogs. It's absolutely great.
Yeah, it was in between Ranger or Ray, but we just felt that Ray was a 55-year-old baseball fan.
Ray or Jay or anything. No, that's not going to work.
So our game changer of the week, this is something really exciting that we bring you. It's just one player that we want to highlight who is making moves in Major League Baseball. And our game changer of the week comes from a team that's talked about a lot, not always for the best reasons,
right?
quite
But
frankly.
the Oakland A's have been way better this year than we thought. And Mason Miller is their closer. And he's thrown 12 and a third innings. He's walked 4, and he's struck out 25, and he has 7 saves. Alex Wood, one of their pitchers, a veteran player who's been all across the major leagues, told me on Saturday, Mason Miller has the greatest fastball I've ever seen. And he said, and I played, he said, with Aroldis Chapman in his prime, but Chapman had this really long arm swing where you could see the ball. What Miller does is he keeps the ball like up against his chest or against his belt like this. He's already striding down the mound. He's still got the ball here, and then suddenly, pow, it jumps out. Ross Stripling told me, another guy on the A's, he said he has the quickest arm I've ever seen. Now, quickest means you just can't see it. You can't watch the ball. It just kind of explodes out of his midsection. That's a quick arm. And the amazing thing about him, he throws 100.7 miles an hour on average and has gotten it up to nearly 104.
Wow.
But here's the thing. He's had a bunch of injuries. He even had diabetes. He weighs 230 pounds, Jeff. He lost all this weight a couple years ago down to 155. I mean, that's what you weigh. And he's put on 75 pounds since. Now he's 6'5", 230, and he is the most overpowering pitcher in the game at this moment, at least according to Ross Stripling.
Well, that's some serious perseverance. To be able to go through those medical issues and continue to pitch at the highest level, it's unbelievable. That's our game changer of the week. We've got Mason Miller, and we move on to the Quirkjians. These are the goofy sides of baseball. And before you go off on your Quirkjians, because I know you probably got quite a few, I have one that came into our website, greatgamerwhat.com. You can reach out there. That's also where you can find all of the places to listen, whether it's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, you name them all. YouTube as well will be there. Jim Pop actually messaged us, and not too long ago, I think it was 2 episodes back, we did the funniest names of players. You mentioned Burger King, Burger pitching to King.
Right. The Burger King at bat, yeah.
And he had one that we failed to mention that he thought was great. August 17th, 2016, the Pirates and the Giants were playing each other. Ivan Nova.
Oh, no. Yes, it's Novocaine, of course. Of course. Jeff, that's a whole lot. It's a great tweet, okay? I've got all the starting pitchers, Novocaine, Diamond Sale, Mason Dixon. I've got all of those. Don't think that and we always said that for the Novocaine pitching matchup, Chad Moeller should have been the catcher, but he wasn't. So don't start me on starting pitching matchups. I've got all of those memorized also.
Thank you so much, Jim, for chiming in, greatgamerwhat.com. What do you got for the Quirkjians?
Well, there were a million of them this week, but my favorite one was that Wyatt Langford, who's this great young player for the Texas Rangers, making his major league debut this season. He, after an amazing spring training of power, finally hit his first major league home run, and it was an inside the park home run. So I was amazed to see that he's the 5th Ranger. They've been around since 1972. The 5th Ranger whose first career home run in the major leagues was an inside the park home run. Does that sound like a lot to you for one organization?
Like a ton.
I didn't think there would be nearly that many. And I keep track of these things. My favorite one was in 1992. Butch Henry hit his only home run of his career, and it was an inside the park home run. And get this, Jeff, he was a pitcher. How great is that? Only in baseball can a pitcher's only home run be an inside the park home run.
That just brings me back to our second guest, Chris Young, the general manager of the Rangers, speaking of, who hit a triple as a pitcher.
Right. Tallest man, 6'10", ever to hit a triple. These are the things I keep track of.
If you missed that episode, go back in the feed, find the Chris Young episode, which was tied to March Madness as well.
All right, a couple other things. Mike Trout, who's having a great year, 10 home runs, 13 RBIs. So I checked. No player since RBIs became official in 1920 has ever gotten to 10 home runs and had as few as 13 RBIs. So it's the fewest RBIs ever by a player who got to 10 home runs. No one's ever done that before in the history of the game, which I find amazing. But these things pop up all the time. It's like Aaron Judge. Aaron Judge, as of Sunday, had grounded into 9 double plays in the month of April. The only player who had more than that before we got to May was Jim Rice in 1985. He had 11 grounded into double plays. There were some great home run notes this week. So Willie Castro hit a home run on his birthday for the second year in a row. You would think that would be kind of hard to do. The record holder for that is Alex Rodriguez and Mark Reynolds. Both hit a home run on their birthday 6 different times.
What?
How about that? You homer on your birthday 6 different times. Mark Reynolds, who hit 299 homers, one of the funniest people I've ever met, he looked at me after I told him that stat. He said, Tim, I'm the holder of a lot of weird records out there in baseball, because he used to strike out a lot, but hit an awful lot of home runs. Also on Saturday, Jeff, we had this amazing, Lisa, a lot of things are amazing to me, but the Red Sox won 17-0, and they had a position player pitch in a victory. And the last time they had a position player pitch in a victory was in 1920. Usually you pitch a position player when you're 20 runs behind, but they were 17 runs ahead. And on the same day, the Yankees won a game, and they used a position player also, and they won the game also. The last time the Yankees won a game with a position player pitching was Rocky Colavito in 1968.
And they did it in the same week?
Yeah, on the same day. The Red Sox and the Yankees on the same day.
You know, it's funny because I go through all of the responses from people who listen to the show, and we really are so grateful for you being a part of our family and enjoying what we get to do. But I really do feel like baseball, this is the only sport that really has these. And that's why Quirkjians are so special.
Right. I don't think these work in basketball and football nearly as well. I got to thinking, Jeff, since we had a discussion a couple of weeks ago about baseball players who have the same name as singers, Carlos Santana, who came up as a catcher. Yep. So he is the catcher on our all-singer team for this week, okay? So Prince Fielder.
That was going to be my first choice. If you don't have Prince Fielder, then...
Prince Fielder is the first baseman. Yeah. Donovan Solano is the second baseman. Who's the shortstop? I brought it up the other day. He's got 117 singles, remember?
Oh, my gosh. I'm blanking.
First name, famous, Elvis Andrews.
Elvis Andrews. You're right.
Okay.
We did talk about him the other day.
Chris Brown is the third baseman, former Giants third baseman. Chris Young, who we talked about, country singer named Chris Young. Of course, outfielder Chris Young. Deion Sanders.
Yeah.
And I had to look this one up. Fabian Gatke, Gattke, played a million years ago, but Fabian was some famous singer. I don't know anything about him either. I loved our 5-man pitching staff. Of course, we have Kenny Rogers. We have Michael Jackson. Right. We have Chris Martin, who I've learned is the lead singer from Coldplay.
Well done.
We have Drake Britton, which Drake... famous first name, and there was a pitcher who pitched 180 major league games. His name was Phil Collins. Who knew? So I came up with our all-singer team based on baseball player names. Jeff, this is what you do when you have nothing else to do with your life and you have no hobbies. So sorry about that.
Can you just rattle off a couple Drake lyrics for me?
No.
Are you a fan of Drake?
No.
Chris Brown?
Jeff, we've been over this. I don't know anything about music. Jeff, I took a flight many years ago, and I met these guys on the plane, and I said, who are you guys? Because they were traveling together. And they said, we're Nickelback. And I had no idea what Nickelback was. I didn't know it was a band. So I think they expected me to say, hey, great, I've got all your albums, and I've never even heard of them. But I took a flight with them, and eventually I figured it out.
I think you would know more Nickelback songs.
No.
Look at this photograph.
Jeff, I don't know any songs. We've been over this. I don't know anything about anything other than baseball and a little bit of basketball.
Well, maybe next week we'll have you do a little Hotline Bling dance from Drake's famous music video. We can make that happen, maybe. That's a great list, and it kind of goes on the heels. I just wanted to wrap this one up. Somebody on Twitter mentioned, because you put our all-car team,
right,
which included Ranger Suarez. A lot of mentions on the podcast.
Right.
Man.
He's on every week. He's Emily's favorite player.
So, but somebody chimed in saying, who is the manager of the all-car team? Who do you think?
I don't.
Connie Mack.
That's great. Managed more games by far of anyone in history. Jeff, if you don't know who Connie Mack is, he used to wear a suit during the games, okay? Wow. Every other manager is wearing a uniform, and Jack McKeon, who won the World Series in 2003 with the Marlins, told me once, he said, I want to wear a suit to a game, because he was the oldest manager in the game, and he was like 73 years old. He said, I want to wear a suit and walk to the mound and take my pitcher out wearing a suit. Needless to say, that didn't happen.
This date in baseball, marking it down at the release of today's episode, April 30th, 2024. What do you got for us?
Right. Willie Mays on this date hit 4 home runs in one game in Milwaukee. And Lon Simmons, the Hall of Fame broadcaster, told me once, he said, the wind was really blowing in that day. And he said he hit a ball that was caught at the warning track. Otherwise, he would have had 5 home runs. That's how great Willie Mays was. And on this date in 1923, the Yankees signed 20-year-old Lou Gehrig to a contract, which of course became one of the great players of all time. For me, one of the 5 greatest hitters ever. And without hesitation, he's the greatest first baseman. I don't think there's a close second.
My favorite part of the show, it's in the cards here on Is This a Great Game or What? So we're going to rip open a deck of cards, or pack, excuse me. I made that mistake
every week you make that mistake.
What am I, a magician? Pull a rabbit out of a hat? Okay, so if you watch on YouTube as well, you can actually see the cards that we're pulling from this pack, and then you'll be able to see. So Mike Yastrzemski.
So this, of course, is the grandson of Carl Yastrzemski, the great Hall of Famer, one of the great number 8s of all time. We'll talk about that some other time. And I once asked Mike, I said, did you ever consider wearing your dad's jersey, your grandfather's number? And he looked at me and he goes, there's enough pressure having Yastrzemski on my back. I don't need to wear number 8. That's why he wears number 5.
The real pressure is on the uniform guy to spell it correctly.
Right.
Could you imagine?
YASTRZEMSKI.
All right, we've got Johan Duran.
All right, now he is the closer for the Twins, Jeff. He throws 100. I saw him pitch a game at Minute Maid Field in Houston. I was scared to death that someone was going to get killed. That's how hard he throws. And by the way, he also faced, Ezekiel Duran. So we had the Duran matchup, which I told Roxy Bernstein when we did a game on the radio together. I said, oh, by the way, we had a Duran. And Roxy, who loves and knows everything about music, said, well, what's your favorite Duran song? And I said, well, I don't know what any, and he took me on the air. He said, you're 66 years old and you don't know one song from, do you know a Duran song?
No, but I'm also 30. I think there's an excuse here.
I feel better. No one on the podcast knows a Duran song. Sorry.
The fact that you've been to how many concerts?
3.
And one of them is Yellow Card.
Another
one is Kenny Chesney.
Right, and the other is Dan Fogelberg. And if you remember, I got Yellow Card mixed up with Green Day. I called it Green Card. I screwed up the whole thing. That's why I don't go to concerts.
All right. Next up. Legendary Hall of Famer one day, Mike Trout.
All right, Mike Trout is one of the greatest players of all time, the greatest number 27 ever, and will go down as one of the 10 to 15 greatest players ever, perhaps someday. So this is how playful he is and how competitive he is. Raul Ibanez told me this story. They were in spring training years ago, and Mike Trout's taking BP, and he says to the guys on the cage, I'm going to hit a home run in that trash can. And it's not a dumpster, Jeff. It's a green trash can beyond the left center field fence. And 13 pitches later, he had a home run into the trash can. And then Raul told me that Trout did it again that spring after predicting he was going to do it. So I went to Trout, who's the most humble kid in the world. I said, did this happen? He refused to answer. I said, damn it, did you hit a ball in the trash can? He goes, yeah, I hit it in the trash can, okay? That's how good Mike Trout is. He can hit a home run 390 feet into a trash can.
Another future Hall of Famer, Clayton Kershaw, our final for It's in the Cards.
Well, of course, one of the great pitchers of all time. He has the lowest ERA of any pitcher with that many innings since 1920. That's how great Clayton Kershaw is. And on this date, by the way, Jeff, he became the all-time strikeout leader for the Los Angeles Dodgers. And, to pass Drysdale and Sutton and Koufax is pretty darn good. And I don't know if you know this, Jeff, but I love anagrams, okay? So I was on a flight in a middle seat once flying from Connecticut to Oklahoma City, and I was so bored. I just worked on a bunch of names and saw what they came out with in an anagram. The anagram for Clayton Kershaw is LAK Hero Wants Sigh. That's Clayton Kershaw's.
Using every letter?
Every letter. You could say LA Sigh Hero Wants K, but in this case, since he's a strikeout leader, it's LAK Hero Wants Sigh. That's what I did in the middle seat on Southwest for an entire flight.
I sometimes don't know what to think about your spare
Jeff,
time.
what is the theme of today? Seamhead. What does a seamhead do when he has nothing else to do? He tries to come up with an anagram for Clayton Kershaw.
Well, and you look at people like Robert Langdon, the fictional character from Da Vinci Code.
Right.
He solves crimes with his mind.
Exactly. Right. Da Vinci.
Great.
Right.
These great moments.
Your grandfather was in the history of mankind. Right. Love that movie.
Along with National Treasure.
Our two guilty pleasures. I can't stop watching them if they come on the air.
Like your 66th birthday, we were right here in the house and we turned on the Da Vinci Code and National Treasure.
That is so bad.
All right, so one of my favorite moments in the show is League in Lids. So I actually have a surprise for the show, for you, Dad.
Oh, great.
So we were using before a hat that was very significant to us. It was a hat that says Team Tim. When my dad was inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame, my mom and my sister designed them. My mom created them, and we made hats, right? Well, I thought it would be only fitting with our friends Lids. I went onto their website, and I wanted to find a hat that would be perfect for this segment. But you and I both know, right? We're not a podcast about one team.
Right.
So I just typed in MLB, and look what I got. Look at this lid.
Wow.
From Lids.
Now that is a cap.
It has
does that all 30 teams on there?
All 30 teams.
That is so great.
In really high quality stitching. And trust me when I say, I was excited when I saw this. I said, this is perfect for the segment. But when I got it, I was even more impressed with just the overall quality. And now I'm scared to touch it because it's so beautiful. I just want to hang it up on the wall. So what we do is we put all of the teams in Major League Baseball in the lids. Right here, our new lids. And we take one out every week, and then we leave them out. So we'll never have a repeat. And this week, Colorado Rockies. Been a tough start to the season, but I mean, they've been in the news with the Mexico series.
Yeah.
So
poor Rockies. They have really had a terrible year. And Jeff, all their first 28 games of the season, they have trailed at one point or another in all 28 of their games this year. Wow. That ties for the longest in modern Major League history. And by the way, only in baseball can modern history be described as 1900 on. That is modern history. The 1887 Metropolitans featuring Candy Nelson. They went their first 29 games into a season. And I feel sorry for the Rockies. They play in a beautiful ballpark. I love Denver, but the elevation doesn't help them there, Jeff.
Right.
The curveball doesn't break the same way there. And even though you can score more runs there, when you go on the road after playing at home, now you're going to see a curveball that has really crisp break to it. So I think it works against them. I think it's one small reason that they've never won the World Series. And then they went to Mexico, which was a great 2-game series with the Astros. But they go to Mexico, and the elevation there was higher than it was in Denver. So they didn't get any breaks when they did that.
I think it's so awesome that Major League Baseball is expanding. I got into a little tiff with somebody on Twitter, bad idea, they said, why are we focused so much on international? I said, baseball is so important to the Latin American culture and now the Japanese culture with all these players. And you're going to London again this year for the London series.
Jeff, we've been over this. Baseball is an international game. Football is trying to get international, but they're as international as International House of Pancakes.
Right.
Baseball really matters when it comes to international games.
Mike Schur is our guest. He is the creator of Parks and Rec and Brooklyn Nine-Nine, who's also a huge part of The Office, the American version of The Office here. And we're going to get to him because he is a massive Seamhead. Before, though, Seamheads, Dad. You did the Seamhead edition of baseball tonight on ESPN for a couple of years.
For years, and I loved every bit of it. I love Seamheads, Jeff, okay? Seamheads are just people that have an unhealthy addiction to the game, but in a really good way. Mark Simon, who used to be a great researcher at ESPN and is still all over the place, he can tell you who made the last out of every World Series back to 1950. Think about that. That's impossible to do. Jeff Bennett, another former great researcher at ESPN who's moved way up the ranks there, he can tell you what every baseball card looks like from 1982 through 85. So I once tested him. I said, Robin Yount, 1982. And he said he had two cards that year. One, he's like hitting a line drive, and the other, he's running out of the box. Two different cards. He got them both with just a random name that I threw out there. Judd Birch, who works for ESPN. He's our umpire expert at ESPN. You can ask him any night, because I did one night on a random Tuesday in August. I said, who's working second base in Texas tonight? And he goes, Adrian Johnson. He knew the second base umpire on a random Tuesday night game in August in Texas.
Wasn't he the one who put together the umpire ejection fantasy league?
We'll get that when we have our fantasy. We'll get to that when we have our fantasy show.
Stay tuned for that.
The great George Will. George Will is a Seamhead. There's no question. And when he goes to a hotel, and he's a big Cubs fan.
Wait, like the political commentator,
the George Will? Yes, Dr. Will. He's like the smartest man I've ever met. But when he checks into a hotel, he always remembers the room number based on uniform numbers for the Cubs. So if he's in 1431, that's an easy one. That's Ernie Banks, Fergie Jenkins. There used to be a guy named Mike. Well, he's still there, Mike Petica. I met him late 70s, early 80s. Get this, Jeff, in Cleveland. He was an AP writer, and he could figure out any batting average that you gave him in his head in a matter of seconds. So if I said, Mike, 127 hits, 515 at-bats, he would have it like that, like in 2 seconds. That is really weird. And this is a true story. The great David Vincent, who worked for Sabre, and I've been a Sabre member. Your grandfather, Pop, was the Sabre. I love Sabre. Don't get me wrong. Those people are all out of their minds. In fact, I spoke at the Sabre convention like 2 years ago, and that was my opening line to the 300 people in the room. Every one of you is crazy. And they all laughed because they all recognized this is what Seamhead people do. They're amazing. And of course, our dear friend Jim Henneman, who just had the press box named after him at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, is a Seamhead for a different reason, because he has covered the game for over 65 years, still loves every second of every game he watches. And I'm telling you, Jeff, no writer has ever understood the playing of the game better than our friend Jim Henneman. And just in memoriam, we have Howie Schwab, who used to work at ESPN, who was a baseball Seamhead. He recently died. But Howie was a Seamhead for every sport. Yeah. Baseball, basketball, Olympics, everything. He had his own show called Stump the Schwabs.
People still talk about that show. It's
and
been
years. No one could stump. I was afraid of Howie because I was not about to get in a battle of wits with him, because he would clean my clock.
Now, you mentioned Sabre a little bit earlier. I'm glad you pronounced it right, not Sabre, for my Office fans out there. Dunder Mifflin is a part of Sabre. I'm just so excited to talk The Office with Mike Schur.
This is important. When you meet a player or someone who wears a uniform, who has some Seamhead qualities, that's the person you're immediately attracted to. Like Gene Mauch, one of the great managers ever. He showed me once by hand how to look at a box score, and using left on base, ground and double plays, you could figure out who made the last out of a game just by looking at the box score. Sometimes obvious, but most times it's not. That's what a manager showed me how to do in the mid-'80s. Aaron Boone, of course, the manager of the Yankees, is the biggest seamhead that I've ever met. I used to play a game called From Ozzie to Oral, where we would name the greatest players of all time at each number 1 through 55. And he knew all the numbers. And he knew numbers of players that even I didn't know in some cases. Like I said, all right, what number did Johnny Ray wear? He was a good second baseman, but not a great second baseman. And he went like this with the Pirates or with the Angels. Like, you got to tell me which.
Obviously.
Right. So Booney was the greatest at that. And do you have a baseball card there? Give me a baseball card. Yeah. So this is what Booney can do. He can take any baseball card, look at it, and he can tell you in which stadium the picture is taken. And he would routinely send me, when we worked together, he would send me baseball cards and say, which stadium was this taken in? And 9 out of 10 times I got it wrong. I would send it back to him, and I would give him a baseball card, and he would look at it and he goes, Candlestick Park. Don't waste my time. I mean, that's how good Booney is at this. He can do everybody's batting stance. He is different than everyone else. But he's not the only guy in uniform who can do that. Marcus Semien of the Rangers, he and I were at the batting cage last year during the ALCS. I mean, we have more important things to talk about. And I was talking about the year that Barry Bonds walked 230 times. And Marcus Semien goes, it was 232. That's what he said. And he was right, which I just love that he got that right instead of me. I also wanted to mention, Colin McHugh, former reliever. He'll be back in the big leagues. I love this. I'd written something about Frank Robinson once, and Colin McHugh just came up to me and asked me, I need to know more about Frank Robinson. I need to talk to you someday about Frank Robinson, who'd retired like 40 years earlier, but he was still interested in Frank Robinson's playing career. I just love that. Kevin Pillar, major league outfielder for years. Last year, we're talking about something, and he just out of nowhere says, all right, who's your Mount Rushmore of switch hitters? Who are your 4 greatest switch hitters of all time? And he had his list, which no player in uniform ever thinks about anything like that. And then we went through all this stuff that only a Seamhead baseball writer would have with another baseball writer, but now I'm having it with a baseball player. And my favorite one about all these is Terry Kennedy, who used to catch for the Orioles a million years ago when I covered the team. So just 2 weeks ago, on a Saturday morning, he just sends me this random text. 17 players have won 10 Gold Gloves. Name them. I mean, after all these years, he's still sending me random texts because he's still really interested in how many guys won 10 Gold Gloves. So there I am on a Saturday morning with a wedding to go to that afternoon, and now I just have to put my head down and get all 17, which eventually I did, but it was torture, believe me.
We've got a great Seamhead guest who hopefully is going to convince you to do the immaculate grid at some point, because I know he does it every day. Mike Schur of, just one of the greatest television writers of our time, created Parks and Rec, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, was a big part of The Office. He's going to be joining us, a big Seamhead himself, next on Is This a Great Game or What? Is This a Great Game or What? And our guest this week is Mike Schur. Now, he's not a baseball player, he's not a general manager, but he is a Seamhead. Mike Schur has been involved in so many incredible things, including The Office, Parks and Rec, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Saturday Night Live. He was a writer. I mean, the list goes on and on. And Mike, thank you so much for joining our podcast. We've been so excited to have you on.
It is my great pleasure. And I have a general rule, which is if anyone in the country nay, the world, wants to talk to me about baseball, I will appear on a screen and talk about baseball. It's just a rule to live by, and I've followed it my whole life, and it's never steered me wrong.
Right. And as a tribute to you, Mike, I wore my Walter Johnson sweatshirt because you may or may not know I went to Walter Johnson High School in Bethesda, Maryland, named after the greatest pitcher of all time. So this is just for you.
Do you know that my friend Dan Gore, who created Brooklyn Nine-Nine with me, also went to Walter Johnson High School in Bethesda, Maryland?
No way.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
I wonder.
Proud Walter Johnson alum. He went there for a couple years and then transferred to a school called St. Anne's in Brooklyn. But he talks a lot about Walter Johnson High School. So you have that in common.
Right. I worked for the school paper. It was called The Pitch. I did some work for the yearbook. It was called The Wind Up. Yeah. All right, never mind. So, Mike, we love baseball. I just want to know first from you, your love of the game is unparalleled. The first time I ever met you was over the phone, and I couldn't believe what a baseball dork you were and what a baseball nerd you were. Where did that come from for you?
Pretty classic story, I would say, which is I'm 5 years old. I was living in suburban Massachusetts just for a year because my dad took a job in Boston, and my dad's college roommate bought me a rack pack of Topps baseball cards, 1981 Topps baseball cards, and some magical flame got lit. Like, I looked at them, I opened them, I pored over them, I stared at them, I organized them, something happened. And then my dad, I got very into the game, like in theory, and I read the box scores. My mom claims that I taught myself to reading box scores in the newspaper. And then my dad took me to Fenway. I still remembered I was literally 5 years old. I remember walking through the concourse, through the crowd, out the tunnel, and seeing the field for the first time. And I know this is the biggest cliche among baseball dorks. This is as cliche as it gets. But I saw the green field and I saw the monster, and I've never been the same. It became my first and truest and deepest love was the game and the vibe and the feeling and the noise and the crowd. Red Sox won that day. I believe they won 8-0. I believe Dwight Evans had 4 or 5 RBI. And from that moment on, it was just the thing that I loved, and I still love it more than any other sport.
Was it a happy accident that on the cast of The Office, there were so many Boston-based, like, born and raised? John Krasinski, famously from the Boston area. There was quite a few Red Sox fans in that cast.
John is from, I want to say, Newton. BJ Novak is from, I think, also Newton. Mindy Kaling's from Lexington. Steve Carell's from Acton. Like, I was from Hartford/Wellesley for that 1 year. So, yeah, it's a little bit of a happy accident, although there is an enormous contingent of Boston people in Hollywood generally. Like, you run into them all the time. It's a place that, I mean, it has a ton of colleges, right? And there's a lot of improv comedy and sketch comedy and stand-up comedy. So it was a little bit of an accident, but it's also not wildly out of the norm for any TV show, really.
Now, I nerded out before the interview about how much I love The Office and Parks and Rec, so I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole too much. But if there was one cast member of either The Office or Parks and Rec that you think would be the most fun to go to a baseball game with, maybe even to a Red Sox game, who would it be?
Ooh, boy. The Office or Parks and Rec, you're saying?
Yeah.
Well, Jim Halpern was a baseball fan, was a sports fan, really more of an NBA fan, I would say. But he certainly knew a lot about sports. He is up there. I would say it would be fun to go with Leslie Knope because it would probably be fun to do just about anything with Leslie Knope. It would be fun to go with Andy Dwyer, Chris Pratt's character, because he was a big sports fan, and also he would just be a delight. He would drink 11 beers and have a great time. There's a lot of characters on those two shows who would probably be a good baseball date. But I would say those are my top 3.
Who was your guy on the Red Sox? Who was the guy that you looked at and said, that's my guy?
I have been, for so long, Red Sox fans were quite literally cursed. And then starting when Pedro showed up, then it's been this embarrassment of riches. We had Nomar, we had Pedro, we had Ortiz. We've had so many guys who have brought me so much joy and happiness. It's hard to even count now. I was doing a book event. I do a podcast with Joe Posnanski. I was doing a book event with him, and we were taking questions from the audience. And someone from the audience said, if you could have only ever had one of these two guys on your team, Ortiz and Pedro, who would you choose? And it is the most agonizing 15 minutes of my life. trying to, I got up and I paced around the stage, and I had an immediate tension headache. Like, the idea of having to choose one of those two guys was too painful. And I mean, at the end of the day, I think I said Ortiz just because he was on the team longer. But both of those guys, those are my two favorite Red Sox of all time. And
well, I have to say, you two are way too similar because, Mike, you've heard of Immaculate Grid?
Of course.
So,
have I heard of Immaculate Grid? How dare you?
Every baseball fan knows Immaculate Grid. So all my buddies were texting me when it really started to catch fire, right? And saying, Jeff, your dad's got to do this. You got to send it to him. And I sat down with him. And there was one, and I wish I could remember which one it was. He was pacing the floor, and he told me this is no longer fun because if I don't get this right every time with the most rarity score, then I'm going to get killed on Twitter. And these are the things that he worries about, which I understand. But you were pacing the floor because that's how much you love to know the
Mike,
game.
It's clear. I'm only good at one thing, and this is it, knowing stupid, obscure, arcane baseball stats. That's why the Immaculate Grid is work for me as opposed to pleasure for me, because if I get one of them wrong, that's the end of it for me. So, by the way,
I was just gonna say, look, I get that, and I don't blame you, but this is not my primary job, and I have had to curb myself because at the height of Immaculate Grid, I was probably spending 2 to 3 hours a day. Because I would be down to one square left, and I would be like, I'm pretty sure that Damon Buford played for the Rangers, but I'm not 100% sure. I know he played for the Cubs, but I don't know if he played for the Rangers. And suddenly I was like, I'm wasting my life. I have children. I have a 16-year-old child and a 14-year-old child, and I'm ignoring them, trying to remember whether Damon Buford played for the Rangers. So here's what I did. I don't know if this will help you. I gave myself 5 minutes. I do it in 5 minutes. And if I get something wrong, I get something wrong. But I wake up in the morning, I have a cup of coffee, I go to Immaculate Grid, and I give myself 5 minutes. And as a result, I'm not immaculate very often. I usually get, 6 out of 9 because time's running out, and you just got to say, I think Damon Buford played for the Rangers. And then, so you could try it that way where you're like, look, if I get something wrong, oh, well, I only had 5 minutes. If I took 2 hours, I could probably get it all right. Well, and that has proven to be effective.
I'm hoping you can convince my dad, because every time we get together for a weekend or a vacation, he said, I'm not working this weekend, Jeff. I said, it's not work. It's fun. It's Immaculate Grid. But it's not fun for him. You two are such seamheads, and I love the stats that you both love to share with each other. Is there, Mike, a stat? Because this is my dad's entire capacity of his brain, our strange statistics, right? He has to scratch his head a minute to think of my birthday, but he could tell you who won the MVP in 1978.
I could tell you the 15 guys who've hit 40 homers in a season with 4 letters or less in their last name.
Mike, he can tell you the home run leader for every single player's first letter of their last name.
Right, like the eighth.
I used to be able to do that. I memorized that list, but it is so outdated now. And there's so many people have been replaced on that list, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s. All the guys are gone now. None of the early guys are gone, or they're still there.
Mike, I can't even begin to tell you how happy I was when Chase Utley and Ryan Zimmerman, in like a 3-week period, became the greatest U and the greatest Z of all time. These are the things that I pay attention to. The question is, Mike, is there a list that you know? Is there a stat that you know that is so unhealthy that you know it, but at least you know it and you're proud of it?
To be clear, they are all unhealthy, right? Let's just start with that. There are many. I mean, Sarah Langs, your friend and mine, Sarah Langs, had that stat about Prince and Cecil Fielder that I loved so much.
It's the best. 319 homers. The best, right.
Each of them 319 homers and the same exact number of home runs in 4 different innings. Like it was the same number of fourth inning homers, same number of fifth inning homers, same number of 2-out homers. I think they both had 97 2-out homers. Like that's wonderful. I'll tell you the ones that I've been obsessing about recently are Tony Gwynn stats, because I have a friend who's a sicko Padres fan, and Tony Gwynn is the author of some of the most incredible stats in baseball history. The one that I said on the Le Batard show recently a couple weeks ago is his career average was 338, and his career average facing Cy Young Award winners was 339. That's wonderful. That's poetry right there. Right. To be just, I mean, it's better than if it were exactly the same to me. Like the fact that it's 1 point higher over how many at bats is so wonderful. But I'll tell you the stat that I think is the craziest stat in the modern game. It's a weird one. Terrence Gore of the New York Mets, a fifth outfielder, pinch runner guy. He played for 4 teams, I think, in his career, which was like 8 years long. He had about, I want to say he had 70 at-bats, maybe 85, 90 plate appearances. Here are his stats in his 4 teams, 8 years, 70 total at-bats. 0 home runs, 1 triple, 2 doubles, 3 World Series rings. He won 3 rings in 70 at-bats. He was on the 2015 Royals. He was on the Dodgers team in the COVID year as a pinch runner, and he was on the Braves team the following year. So Terrence Gore, who had 70 at-bats for 4 teams in 8 years, has 3 times as many rings as Clayton Kershaw.
Right.
That's wild.
3 more rings than Mike Trout.
Right.
I mean,
3 extra base hits and 3 rings. I mean, that's
right.
That is the beauty of baseball, that can happen. And these things happen all the time. Terrence Gore, who could just fly, wore number 0, ran all over the field, but it was almost like Herb Washington, who played in the 70s. He was a sprinter that they made a pinch runner for the Oakland A's. Those are the stats, Mike. And as for Tony Gwynn, by the way, 297 3-hit games, 1 3 strikeout game,
yeah.
And he told me in that 3 strikeout game, he really struck out a 4th time, but the umpire missed the call. Otherwise, he would have had a 4 strikeout game. And of course, Tony Gwynn never struck out more than 40 times in any season, which is just unfathomable today. And this is my favorite one. For a 5-year period, he batted .335 when he had 2 strikes on him. And the only hitter in that 5-year period to have a higher average using all of his strikes was Mike Piazza. That's how great a 2-strike hitter Tony Gwynn was.
I have to say
I'll do you one better. Wait, the major league batting average, I think, since 1988 with 2 strikes is something like 185, or it's below 200. And his career average with 2 strikes was 302. It was like 125 points higher than the rest of the league.
Right. And I think I told you this, Mike. 1994, the year he was going to hit 400 before the strike came. He told me he used 1 bat the entire season. Now, he did hold it out against tough left-handers like Jeff Fassero, who might get in on him and break his bat. He used 1 bat the entire year. He called it 7 grains of pain. And he used, Peter Gavilia broke 144 bats in 1 season. He just overpowered his bats and the baseball. But Tony Gwynn told me he broke that bat the next spring training in 95. In spring training, hit on a backfield against Rob Picholo, one of the coaches. And Tony said, when I broke that bat, he said, I almost started to cry. And Rob Picholo, the pitcher, said, so did I. That's how great Tony Gwynn was. There are a million Tony Gwynn stats.
I just feel like I'm watching a ping pong match here. And it's all out of love. There's no competition on one-upping each other, but it's, speaking of that, Mike. Oh, Tim, let me tell you that I was thinking.
And let's get back to Pedro for a second, Mike. Okay, we know 99, 2000. His ERA in those 2 seasons combined was 190. The league ERA for those 2 years combined was 490. Exactly.
Yeah.
3 runs lower. You watch those 2 years. No one has ever seen 2 years back-to-back better than Pedro 99, 2000. Am I right or wrong?
No, you're 100% right. And it was the most difficult to understand thing of my baseball watching experience because he was short and goofy, and he was always like kind of goofing around, and he would go out to the mound and he would absolutely obliterate lineups. He sliced through those lineups. I remember checking a box score in a game he had pitched in 99 because I hadn't been able to watch the game. I was living in New York, and I looked at the box score, and it was 9 innings, 2 hits, no runs, 15 strikeouts, no walks, and I had no reaction to it. I was like, yeah, that's right. That's what he does. I was one of my greatest, maybe my greatest live viewing in history is I was at the game at Yankee Stadium when he struck out 17 Yankees. I was there. I sat in the left field bleachers and with my friend Eben, and we were it was, the Yankees had demoralized us for generations, and we were there expecting nothing, but it was like, Pedro's pitching, let's go watch. And we were the most Red Sox fans at that moment were the most superstitious bunch of people in the world. You wouldn't, anything you could do, you stand in your kitchen the whole game. If they get a hit, you stand in your kitchen the whole game. You don't move because they got a hit. we were psycho. And we were in the 4th inning of that game. He'd given up a solo homer to Chili Davis in the 2nd inning, which was the only hit he allowed. And then he started mowing people down. And at the end of the 4th inning, my friend Eben turned to me and said, "We're winning this game." And I said, "What is wrong with you? You don't say that out loud. Are you mad? Like you're going to jinx it?" And he was like, "No, I'm not, because that guy is pitching and they can't not touch him." And he, after he said that, did not allow a ball hit into fair territory. The last 5 innings of that game, every out was a strikeout or a foul out. No one hit the ball into fair territory.
Mike,
it's the best pitching performance I've ever seen and ever will see.
And I agree, because I was at the game. It's the first... No, Mike. It's not only was I at the game, it's the first time I was ever a color commentator on a radio game. So I'm scared to death. I've never done this before. I'm with Charlie Steiner. I'm sitting next to him. I'm the analyst. I'm the only guy in the booth. And I get that game. And that game, he went over 300 strikeouts for the season. It was the easiest game to call I've ever seen, because it was still the greatest pitch game I have ever seen. I remember talking to Tino Martinez years later, and he went, "Oh, that was otherworldly. We've never, ever seen stuff like that in our lives." That was Pedro. And the same Pedro, Mike, who once told me when he was in rookie ball, he weighed 138 pounds. Even I weigh more than that, 138 pounds, and he threw 93 miles an hour at 138. I said, "Pedro, how can you explain that?" And he goes, "Well, God gave me that." And that's precisely what happened.
I feel like it's watching him pitch. Then when you there's certain players in the history of the game that obviously there's no video of. You can't see tape of them. We'll never see Satchel Paige pitch in his prime. We can only triangulate how good they were from the comments made about them or the stories or the legends. And I feel like Pedro was that. He was that guy. There's a guy like that every 20 years where the best players in the world just shake their heads in disbelief at what they're watching. It's like the quote about Nolan Ryan, "You can't hit what you can't see," or the way that who was it said Walter Johnson could throw a pea through a battleship. It's like you start to learn how good they were simply by the way the other players describe them. And with Pedro, we got to see it with our own eyes in full color in high definition, and it was a sight to behold.
Right. 99 All-Star game, famously strikes out, the 5 out of 6 guys. After he pitches, he goes into the Red Sox clubhouse, Ted Williams is in there. Ted Williams. I mean, people can't even speak to him. The reverence is so high. And Ted looks at Pedro and says, that is some of the greatest stuff I have ever seen in my life. And Pedro still calls that moment the highlight of his career, because the greatest hitter most of us have ever seen gave him that compliment. That's what baseball is all about.
You know the story of the bat in Cooperstown, the Ted Williams and Satchel Paige bat? This is one of my favorites,
yes,
too.
Tell it.
So there's a bat in the collection in Cooperstown that's it's signed by Satchel Paige, and it has an enormous gouge taken out of it. And the story is that Ted Williams, who was a historian of the game and also had great reverence for the Negro Leagues and used his Hall of Fame speech to advocate for Negro Leagues players being inducted into Cooperstown, he got to hit off Satchel Paige in a game. It was obviously at the very end of Paige's career and Williams's, I think. It was sometime in the mid to late 50s. So he's so excited because he's going to get to hit off Satchel Paige. And he goes up there, and Paige's arm was shot. He was probably, 55 years old at the time or something. Yeah. He probably said he was 55, but was really 65. So he's mostly throwing off speed. So he throws a couple off speed pitches, and Williams fouls him off. And then he decides to throw him a fastball, and he probably threw it 89. But Ted thought he was going to throw another changeup, and he swung right through it. And Ted was so angry at himself, he went back and smashed the bat against the railing of the dugout. And then after the game, took the bat into the opposing clubhouse and said, "Would you please sign my bat for me?" And that bat with Satchel's signature on it is in the Hall of Fame. And my favorite part of the story is that apparently when Ted walked back to the dugout and smashed his bat, there are a couple eyewitness accounts who say that Paige was standing on the mound laughing at him, which is so wonderful. That just, I got you. I threw an 89-mile-an-hour fastball right past Ted Williams.
Right. Well, Ted, of course, is the greatest hitting coach of all time. Managed the Senators in 1969, Mike, when I'm 12 years old, and Ted Williams is our manager, and suddenly they finish over 500, and Eddie Brinkman raises his batting average by 70 points. It's unbelievable. But if I may, Ted hated every part of managing. He just loved the hitting part. So in spring training one year, the coaches are doing a rundown play in spring training, and they can't figure out, do you run him to the bag here? Do you run him back? How many throws? It's a big debate between the coaches. So they go to Ted and say, "Ted, could you please come out here and break the tie and tell us who's right on this play?" He watches them argue about the rundown play. He's so disgusted. Sorry, Jeff. He just says, it, let's hit. And he calls off the rundown play and starts batting practice. That's who Ted Williams was as a baseball guy.
Well, Mike, if you weren't so successful in what you've done in your career in the last 25 plus years as a writer, I would say you missed your calling, because your love for baseball rivals that of my dad. And that's high praise, being a Hall of Famer in your own right as a baseball writer. There's one story that I want to tell about my dad's dad, my grandfather, that I think will make you smile as a Boston Red Sox fan, but also a fan of the game. My grandfather was born in Watertown, Massachusetts in the year 1919. He passed away in 2003.
No!
He never saw, as a lifelong Boston Red Sox fan, he never saw the Red Sox win a World Series. And selfishly, he passed away when I was 10 years old. And growing up with my dad, I didn't grow up with a team, so to speak. I grew up just loving the game. That was what I was told, because Dad wasn't throwing an Orioles jacket around me and saying, "Son, we live and die by the O's. Cal Ripken Jr. is, is your godfather or something." But in following that team that next year, I always thought as a kid, oh my gosh, that's my grandfather up there helping this team come back from down 3-0 in the ALCS against the Yankees. That is what baseball is, and that's what it does for us.
And Mike, 2004, when they finally won, where were you?
Yeah.
And how did you react to that?
So I was at Saturday Night Live through June of 2004, and then I moved to Los Angeles to take a job on The Office. And I'm convinced to this day, again, going back to the superstition, that the only reason they won is because I left the Northeast. I think I had to leave. I think I was the problem. So I was out in Los Angeles, and living and dying with the team as always. We were shooting the first season of The Office. It was October, late October, when the ALCS happened. And I watched the producer of The Office, a guy named Kent Zabornak, knew that I was a big fan and wheeled a TV into the offices where behind backstage where we were shooting. So he was like, you can watch this on mute. So I watched game 1 of the ALCS, and Schilling's ankle was bothering him, and he got lit up, and the Yankees romped. Then we watched game 2 that way. Yankees win again. And I said, I don't want this anymore. Get out of here. I can't do it. So I have a bunch of friends saying, hey, we're going to go to game 3. Can you make it? And I was like, I can. I'm out in LA, whatever. They go to game 3. The Red Sox lose 19-8. And just get absolutely swamped, and they're down 0-3. So all my friends were like, we got to keep watching. And I'm like, I'm not watching this anymore. I can't take this. Why would I do this? Why would I subject myself to this? So there is a Red Sox message board in the primitive days of the internet called the Sons of Sam Horn.
Right.
And on Sons of Sam Horn, very, very primitive message board, early days, there's a thing called a game thread where people just watch the game in real time and just post instantaneous reactions. So I decided that the way I'm going to, in quotes, watch the game is by just refreshing my computer on the Sons of Sam Horn game thread over and over again. That game, you might remember, went to extra innings, was about 5 hours long, and that's the Dave Roberts game of him stealing second, and then Bill Miller singling him in, and then they go to extra innings, and then Ortiz won it with the home run in the 12th. I watched, again in quotes, that game for whatever it was, 4 hours and 58 minutes by hitting refresh on my computer because I could not bear to look at it. Then here's the problem: they won. Got to do it again the next day. So I watch all of game 5 the same way. That game also goes into extra innings and is also 5 hours long. And I'm staring at my computer, hitting refresh and trying to intuit what has happened by these people just posting like Ortiz with 8 exclamation points, So then they go back to New York, and I'm like, I can't do this to myself again. I have to just watch this game, and I'm terrified. So I watched the game at home with my wife in the first house we rented in LA, and that game featured the A-Rod slap out of Bronson Arroyo's arm, and also the Mark Bellhorn home run, originally called a double, which was a home run. It hit the Yankee fan in the chest in left field, and this is pre-replay. And both times in those 2 cases, the umps got together and got the call right. And I remember thinking to myself, this has never happened before. Something is different. This scenario has led to the Red Sox losing, being on the short end of the stick every single time it's been possible for the last 86 years. I think something has fundamentally changed here. They win that game. Keith Folk gets them out of a huge jam in the 9th inning. Every pitcher on that team, Alan Embry and Mike Timlin and Derek Lowe, all those guys had thrown like 700 innings in the span of 6 days. And they get out of that game, and then it gets to game 7. And I said to my wife, I'm going to watch this game again, but I'm sorry to tell you this. You were sitting on the couch to my immediate left for game 6. You have to sit to my immediate left on the couch for game 7. And she said, you're a lunatic, but okay. And she did. And so we watched that game. That game was great. That game was, the romp. Johnny Damon hits 2 homers and a grand slam. Although I'll tell you, here's the depth of my illness. So they're winning. They're winning that game 10-3, right? The Yankees scratch out a couple runs against Pedro in the 7th. They're winning that game 10-3. They go to the 9th inning. And in the 9th inning, I started to think, this is going to really hurt when the Yankees come back and win this. This is going to be really bad. This is when they score 8 runs, and then I start playing it out in my head. I'm like, oh God, like this will be the end of my fan. Like I won't watch baseball anymore. And it wasn't like if this happens in my brain, it was when this happens. Right. When it's like, and I could picture Jeter rounding second and heading for third, and Posada hitting a homer, and then Tony Clark or someone hitting a lucky flare double. I saw the whole thing. And then by the time I was done with that horrifying, miserable fantasy, the game was over and they had won. And then, and sorry to ramble about this, but to be fair, you asked. So, so they go to the World Series. And my wife sits to my immediate left for every one of those 4 games of that World Series. They never trailed for a single inning in that World Series. They led in every single inning. They're up 3-0. We go to game 4. They jump out to a lead. I think they're winning 3-0 in the 9th inning. And Edgar Renteria leads off that inning, I believe. No, wait, did he lead up? Someone led off that inning, maybe Pujols, with a single. And here's what happened in my brain. In my brain, I thought, oh my God, this is how they're going to kill me. They were the first team in history to come back down 0-3 and win a 7-game series. Now they're up 3-0 in the World Series, and now they're going to give up. And they're up 3-0 in the 9th inning. They're going to give up this lead, and then they're going to lose the next 3 games. And the story will be they found the only more miserable way to collapse than they have ever found before. And again, I saw the whole thing. I was like, this is what's going to happen. They're going to lose this game, and they're going to blow this lead, and then people are going to go, it doesn't matter. They're up 3-1, and they're going to lose again because they're still in St. Louis, but then the pressure will be on and the Boston media will be all over them, and they'll go back and they'll lose game 6. And I was playing the whole thing out of my mind, and then I looked up and Keith Foulke was underhanding the ball to Doug Mankiewicz, and this World Series was over and we had won.
Wow.
But it was in my head, a mathematical certainty that even though they had never led for a single, never been behind for a single inning in that World Series, that in the 9th inning, they were going to blow the lead, blow game 5, blow game 6, blow game 7, and be the second team to ever blow a 3-0 lead in a 7-game series. I was sure of it.
You know, I think of the 9th inning in a different way. Remember, Gabe Kapler finished that game in the outfield, and he and Johnny Damon were standing next to each other in between the innings in the outfield. Kapler wore number 19. Johnny Damon wore number 18, and I'm watching the game. I'm at the game, and there they are with 19, 18 lined up. It was the most beautiful thing. That's what I knew. My father was in charge of all this because he was pulling some strings up in heaven. And if I may, Mike, Sam Horn was a gigantic man, hit tremendous home runs, struck out every other time that he didn't hit a home run. And I was at the game when Sam Horn went 0 for 6 with 6 strikeouts that night in Kansas City. So I go to Mike Flanagan, funniest pitcher, funniest guy ever. And I say, all right, Flanny, 3 strikeouts is a hat trick. 4 is a sombrero. 5 is a golden sombrero. What is 6? I've never seen a 6. And he goes, from now on, 6 will always be known as a horn. So if I ever see anybody strike out 6 times in a game and they say, what is that? I'm going to say that is a horn.
Sam Horn played for the New Britain Red Sox, which was the minor league team near me, and I went and saw a game when he was down there, and he hit what I believe is the furthest home run I have ever seen hit at any level. He hit a ball to dead center field in the New Britain Stadium that cleared the fence. It was one of those home runs where the outfielders don't even move. They just kind of straighten up. They're in a crouch, and then they just kind of straighten up. And it was one of the most. I was sitting right, there were 1,000 fans at those games. I was sitting right behind home plate, and it flew directly away from me, and I feel like it never came down. It was one of the most and I was like, this guy's a Hall of Famer. There's no way a guy who can hit a ball that far won't be a huge success. Then he went to the Red Sox and hit like 14 homers in his rookie year in like 40 games, and it was like, this is it. We found our guy. And then not so much.
Yeah, it didn't work out. Mike, we want to keep you forever.
Well, but before you say, I think we need to have Mike again this season on Is This a Great Game or What? Because we could go 4 hours of this.
I need him to tell one more story because
please.
he's such a great storyteller. Mike, I know because we kind of talked about this. The white Bronco in the mid-90s. You have to tell us the story involved. I don't want to ruin anything. Just tell us the story, please.
This is a story I have read in a couple places. I wish I could credit the reporter who first wrote it that I read it, but I don't remember where I read it. I don't know if this is true, but oh boy, do I want it to be true. So the story, it's a Manny Ramirez story. And Manny Ramirez is the author of like 12 of the greatest stories of all time. There's the one of him going to the Harley Davidson dealership in Milwaukee and him saying, I love these motorcycles. He was with his translator, and his translator said, well, you could buy one if you wanted one. And he said, I could. And the guy said, yeah, you make plenty of money. You could absolutely buy one. And he was like, great, I'll take this one. It was like a $95,000 motorcycle. And the guy goes, great. And he's filling out the forms, and he's like, okay, we just need a form of payment. And Manny turns to his translator and says, I left my wallet at the hotel. Can you give me $95,000 and I'll pay you back? But that's not even the best one. The other one, by the way, I love is that he asked the clubhouse attendant to wash his car.
Oh, yeah.
And the guy said, sure, just leave me some money. And he said, okay, I'll put it in the glove compartment. And the guy went to wash his car. And in his glove compartment, there was like a stack of like $10,000 still in the band from the.
Well, then not to interrupt, there's the Manny story of him talking to Alex Rodriguez right after he got traded to the Yankees saying, man, A-Rod, I was really excited about playing on the team with you when it would have been Manny who would have been traded. What's the rumor to begin with?
Manny was going to Texas for A-Rod.
Right.
And then A-Rod went to the Yankees. Oh, it was so bad.
Wonderful.
Million Manny stories. So keep going.
So the one that I read about and love so much is I think it's Manny's rookie year. It's the year that Ogea Simpson goes on the run. Manny was on the Cleveland Indians at the time, and one of the players on the team was Chad Ogea, the pitcher, Ogea. So he's watching he turns on the news, and he hears that the police are after Ogea, that the police are chasing Ogea Simpson, but all he hears is Ogea, and he calls Chad Ogea and says, hey, I don't know what you did, but I think the cops are looking for you. Are you okay? Do you need help? And Chad Ogea was like, I think it's a different Ogea, man,
That might be apocryphal, but I don't care because that's one of the greatest stories.
I don't either.
And Mike dropped that one on me. I'd never heard it, and it was so great. When someone could tell me a story I've never heard before, especially about baseball, I can't believe how happy it makes me.
Mike, we have taken up way too much of your time. We're already going to be booking Mike for another week of Is This a Great Game or What? Maybe halfway through the season, maybe once during the playoffs too, because this has been a joy. It exceeded expectations, and we have been so excited to have you on. So thank you for taking all this time with us.
It is my absolute pleasure, and I will come on anytime you want me to.
Well, thank you, Mike. We'll talk to you soon.
All right.
Thank you so much, Mike Schur, for joining us. We really appreciate a Seamhead in himself. And you know what my favorite Seamhead shirt you own is your double play shirt.
Right.
Which seems to baffle minds.
Right. It's going to look like this was staged, but I promise you it wasn't.
No. Yeah. You have it under your Walter Johnson's. 6 + 4 + 3 = 2.
6, 4, 3 over 2. So Eduardo,
poor Dad. Hold on, we need to get you a new one of those because that one you've worn that one out.
Getting a little banged up here.
Yeah. So that was from Baseballism, right?
Yeah.
Did you see what I'm wearing? A Baseballism shirt.
Really love that store.
Yeah.
Been there a million times.
They're so great.
Eduardo Perez, my dear friend, gave me this told me to
you're
get.
Wearing it.
So yeah, this was you didn't know, and I
no idea.
I just threw it on underneath my sweatshirt. So Eduardo wore this to MIT one day when we were doing a Red Sox game. Of course, your grandfather, Pop, went to MIT. Your Uncle Andy went to MIT. So Eduardo wears this shirt to MIT, and a lot of the students there just kind of looked at the shirt like, what does that mean? Right. 6, 4, 3 equals 2. So he said no one at MIT had any idea what this meant. And then when Eduardo explained the whole double play thing, he said they still had no idea what it meant. So yes, I did. I just wore this out of the blue today, and it came in handy on Seamhead Day.
Thank you so much for joining us for Is This a Great Game or What? We've got a special Mother's Day edition coming up next week, so make sure to join us. And as always, thank you for being part of our family.